financial system, we need to understand that some of the pain we would also have to share. You take a country like Greece, and what is it that you imposed on Greece when they had their crisis? You actually cut their pensions. You actually said, you were promised this pension, you won't get it anymore. That is structural reform. So we need to be careful that when we say structural reforms, some of it has severe impact, and we are acting against a group of vested interests, and we need to be well informed as a society as to what is it that we tackle, which are the interest groups that we tackle, because we point fingers at each other all the time saying, X is benefiting, Y is benefiting. All of us are benefiting in some measure or the other, and all of us represent a vested interest. How do you arrive at a consensus through a democratic process to decide which one needs to be cut and in what measure? Is the critical dialogue and the critical conversation that needs to take place, and the critical decision-making process that has to happen. And ultimately, a lot of it is linked to the real economy. Today, if Tamil Nadu is a stable economy where people come and invest, a lot of it has to do with the welfare state that we run. And let's not forget that, every European state is a welfare state. So it's easy to criticize subsidies, it's easy to criticize certain elements of subsidies. And whom does, for instance, the biggest one, fuel subsidy, whom does it benefit? And that's the one thing that we are not able to address. So whenever we talk about the real economy and subsidies and structural reforms, we need to be prepared that, the pain will be distributed and all of us will have to accept our portion of the blame. And all of that is very critical because, what you need ultimately is greater productivity. What you need ultimately is efficient businesses which run with low transaction costs so that you're adaptable, nimble, flexible. And if there is a crisis which is exogenous, which is caused by the literal flutter of a butterfly, in terms of something happening many, many miles away, you are in a position to handle it. Because if there is a currency fluctuation, yes, there are instruments that you can take to cover for a currency fluctuation. You can hedge against a currency fluctuation. But there is a cost, and many businesses are unwilling to put in that additional cost. I've been on boards of companies where we've taken a conscious decision that we will unwind a hedge that we had made because there is a cost involved to this and we don't want to pay that cost. In which case, you have to make sure that your efficiency and your profit lines are substantial. Similarly, if you have to have a financial sector which is stable, it means that you have to have more capital. It means that you have to put down more equity capital. Somebody has to come up with it. And equity capital is expensive, is costly, which means that you will end up paying higher in terms of interest rates, and you have to be prepared for that. We can't. There is literally no free lunch, and therefore you will have to pay these costs and pay these prices and make sure that as much of the regulation, as much of the structure that we build is done in a manner that ensures that more efficient transactions can take place. And that leads us to another very important issue which I would just like to mention because you're all people going into that area, which is capacity. In today's world, if you have to regulate this complicated market, you have to understand it, you need huge intellectual capacities in terms of regulation. Sadly, what happens is that the regulated entities end up with most of the intellectual capacity, and the regulators themselves are probably 1 or 2 steps behind. There was a time when we wanted to understand this. Again, I speak for the IMF, or even if you speak for the Reserve Bank or any of these institutions which are regulators, you want to regulate the financial sector. It is a complex sector. New products keep coming up all the time. You need people who understand it. But those people are being paid real fancy salaries and they are sitting in the regulated entities and all of those firms. So what do? Well, you wait for a crash And when they lose their jobs, they're ready to come and work for you at your salaries, which is precisely what happened in many cases. But that apart, I think regulators generally tend to be a step or two behind the innovators in the market. And that is one area where, a tremendous amount of capacity needs to be built, tremendous amount of thinking needs to go in. And when I read the draft of the financial sector legislation which has been prepared, the new finance code, draft finance code, that's what strikes me, that you need huge capacity building in terms of the regulatory structure which has been envisaged there. You need a lot more people who understand this complex area, and which is why I think it's very heartwarming to see a seminar, an event of this kind being organized, because you're being exposed very early on to the complexities which dominate today's world, complexities which dominate the business world, the finance world, and hopefully many of you will pick up the kind of abilities and understanding of the markets, of the complexities of the financial market, to be able to participate more effectively on either side of the fence, whether in the regulated entity as people who behave ethically and people who do it the right way, or on the side of the regulators, on our side, so to speak, of the fence, and help us regulate those entities much better to keep it safe, because we can't get rid of finance. You cannot walk away from globalization. You cannot walk away from any of this. You just have to learn, you have to adapt, you have to understand, and you have to be efficient, effective, and productive. And ultimately, that's the only way that the real economy can grow. These are risks, recognize them. It's a big, bad world, but go out there and play your game as fair as you can and learn. So that's I think, a very important measure that this finance conclave is taking, and I would really like to compliment LIBA and the faculty for having organized this. I thank you all very much for the very patient hearing and for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request Father Peter to hand over a memento as a token of our gratitude. Allow me to introduce our next speaker, Thiru Bobby S. Srinivasan, Professor of Finance, GLIM. Dr. Bobby Srinivasan is a distinguished professor of finance and trading and the first-year PGDM director of Great Lake Institute of Management. Before joining Great Lakes, he worked at IFMR, holding the position of president of the institute. Dr. Srinivasan holds a PhD in operations research from Case Western University in the US and has since had over 40 years of teaching experience in the United States, Canada, Singapore, and India. His career in Singapore spanned a period of 25 years, wherein he taught at the Nanyang Technological University as well as the National University of Singapore. Dr. Srinivasan is also a consultant for high net worth individuals in the areas of wealth and risk management. His skills include training executives to trade in global financial products, conducting executive development programs in wealth management. As an academician, he has published several monographs, research articles in international finance journals, and has supervised a large number of research scholars. Dr. Srinivasan was on the Global Advisory Board of ICICI Bank and is currently a member of the National Institute of Bank Management. His areas of interest include studying the various economic crises of the world over the past 50 years and the applied macroeconomic theory surrounding it. He is also one of the best friends of LIBA. It is a pleasure having you here, sir. I request you to address the gathering.